Hello fans of the RPG Fanatic Show, and welcome to this video. Everybody's been asking me to do more history of RPG genre videos, and I have been putting together something like that. This video here is not like one of the official, well-together, well-processed history of genre videos. What this is letting you guys know exactly where I am in the phase of drafting one of those videos. There's a lot of research that's involved, as you can kind of see from this board, which unfortunately is actually a little bit smaller. I've had to add some notes here with sticky notes. I need a bigger board basically to fully draft what I've been doing. But this is what I'm going to do, just to satisfy people for a while, because it's going to take me some time to really do enough research into the subject of the history of RPG genres to make something that I think is going to actually stand the test of time. There's a lot of questions I have open, and we'll talk about that while I go through this with you. Okay, so as I've talked about before, the grandfather of all computer RPGs is Dungeons and Dragons. But before Dungeons and Dragons, it was Chainmail. It's based off of Chainmail, which is a strategy game, not a role-playing game, but role-playing aspects were infused into the version that Dave Arneson made. I'll talk about that in a future RPGology video. So basically, the first RPG is this, right here. That is what we've come to understand a RPG game to be, with Dungeons and Dragons. But Chainmail is still important, because Chainmail inspired Reaper, which was a war game, which inspired Warhammer, which itself has inspired other games as well, which are computer RPGs. Like, if you really want to trace it, Warhammer will eventually lead to Warcraft. Warcraft being very much based on Warhammer, but also based on Doom 2, which was not an RPG, but it was a strategy, a real-time strategy game. Anyway, the point is that D&D is the root of all computer RPGs. They all owe something to Dungeons and Dragons. And as I've talked about in different videos, D&D, the Plato unofficially licensed computer part of it, was hugely influential. It influenced wizardry, it influenced everything that wizardry influenced, which is like the Black Onyx, or Onyx, which is really what's responsible for all the Japanese side of games. Ultima also had a big influence on games like Dragon Quest, which also influenced games like Final Fantasy, and then we go all the way down, we can see that it influenced, the present-day Tales series and Star Ocean and the Mana games, and all kinds of stuff. But we also know that wizardry inspired The Bard's Tale and a bunch of games by SSI Incorporated, like Wizard's Crown and Fantasy, or yeah, I think that's how to pronounce it, Fantasy. And of course, the D&D licensed game they did, like Dungeons and Dragons, Pool of Radiance, and the Gold Box games, and so forth. And those games, of course, had a big influence. I have a sticky here, sort of, but not this one, but yeah, over here, if you really look through the history of the genre, we have Fantasy IV, which influenced Fire Emblem. Why is that? In Fantasy IV, there was a system where your characters can have offspring, and Fire Emblem also incorporates a system almost identically to that type of system into its design. Fire Emblem, of course, we can see is derived from Dungeons and Dragons, from Akalabeth, Ultima, also has inspiration from Plato, version of D&D, Wizardry, the Black Onyx. Then he goes over to Dragon Quest, and Final Fantasy, and then Shining in the Darkness, and Shining Force. But Shining Force, of course, is created from a whole bunch of games which is sent from the Ultima side of things, and also Warhammer, because it was a strategy game, so it's also Chainmail's birth over here. Now there's a variety of Japanese games that were strategy RPGs, like Fukusaku Wars, or Nobunaga's Ambition, that inspired other games like Silver Ghost. And Silver Ghost is cited as an inspiration for Shining Force. Shining Force, descends into Fire Emblem is a descendant of Shining Force. And Langrisser is a descendant of Fire Emblem. Tactics Ogre is a descendant of Langrisser. The Disgaea games by Nippon Ichi they're descended from Tactics Ogre. So, that's how we see that. But we also see, like I mentioned at the start of this, Warcraft is based off Dune 2. Dune 2 is inspired by Herzog Zui, which was inspired by Nabunaga's ambition. But it was also part to do with the Dungeons & Dragons Pool of Radiance games. This is because the designers of Dune 2 worked on the D&D box games. If I remember correctly, one of them worked specifically on Eye of the Beholder. So Warcraft was created because guys at Blizzard really liked Dune 2. And of course, we know Warcraft turns into World of Warcraft, an MMO. But World of Warcraft itself has its own history over here, because it goes with Advent, or Colossal Cave Adventure, if you will, which inspired Zork and Zork's Port Dungeon, which is where we get the term Mud 1 here, with multi-user dungeon, not standing for Dungeons and Dragons so much as this particular port of Zork, because they wanted to make a multiplayer version of Zork, or Dungeon, the version they knew Zork as. And Mud 1 inspired a couple different muds, but eventually did Diku Mud, which was basically taking a very Dungeons and Dragons mechanics and doing a multi-user dungeon with it. And that went down into Neverwinter Nights, which was a licensed D&D game that was one of the first graphical MUDs, MMOs, if you will, which inspired Ultima Online and Barum. There's also a different, I think it was Isles of Kesma, which had to do with Ultima Online. I need to look that back up, so that may not be entirely accurate. But we do know that Blizzard's side, again, they had Diablo here. And Diablo was inspired by NetHack. NetHack was inspired by Rogue. Rogue was inspired by Colossal Cave Adventure. But Diablo itself had a huge influence on Lineage, which was created by the same guy who made Barum, and he was inspired by Neverwinter Nights. And Lineage ended up re-influencing Blizzard's design with World of Warcraft, because when they created their MMO, they decided to look at all the existing MMO properties, basically, and try to improve upon those designs. So, it's funny because Lineage has influence from Diablo. And then the Blizzard went and were re-influenced when they made their own game by a game that was influenced by one of their games. So I just think that's really interesting. Just how Warcraft has lineage with the Japanese side of design with computer RPGs. Yeah, it's there if you look up the history. But things that I need to improve upon, really. I know that Fallout side comes from Tunnels and Trolls, which is a tabletop role-playing system, which was a competitor to D&D. It used different mechanics than Dungeons and Dragons, but it's hard to say if it's really descending from D&D. Definitely as an RPG, it descends from D&D, but the mechanics are slightly different. What I will say is that Tunnels and Trolls inspired a game called Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes, which is again a tabletop RPG. That game inspired Wasteland, which a lot of people know as the predecessor of the Fallout series. But Wasteland had the shell of the idea of how the Fallout games would work, but GURPS and their tabletop RPG system provided the most of the mechanics for the special system used in Fallout. So this is an area I need to still work on, because I think there's more. I think there's more to Fallout and what Fallout has influenced that I don't have currently figured out just yet how it fits in with everything else. Right now, I sort of have Fallout sitting independent, and I don't think that's right. I think there's more influence here. It should be part of this. Another area that I have is the Elder Scrolls games. Now I know that as far as the idea of they say like a Doom-style RPG, but it's not really Doom. First-person RPGs in real time predate Doom, so I don't think that's accurate. I've heard it said that the Elder Scrolls games were inspired by Doom, but that doesn't seem right to me, because I know that Deep Dungeon was created in '86 by Squaresoft for the Famicom system. And Deep Dungeon is basically wizardry in a real-time system where you control one guy. And it has, and if you really play it, and the games that are spawned based upon it, it feels a lot like Elder Scrolls. It really does. Of course, the Deep Dungeon series didn't come out in North America, so it's highly unlikely that when they made Elder Scrolls Arena, they knew anything about it. It's more probable that Dungeon Magic, Sword of the Elements, which was released in '89 here in the States for the Nintendo system, that game, which is descended from Deep Dungeon, may have influenced the Elder Scrolls design coming from the Ultima Underworld series. Possibly. I need to do more research into that to understand that, because I do know that Elder Scrolls was inspired by Ultima Underworld. Another thing I also know is that the Elder Scrolls game was also inspired by Vampire the Masquerade with the vampire tribes, where the beginnings of the faction system is in Elder Scrolls, coming from Vampire the Masquerade. And EverQuest's reputation system, which is now used in pretty much every MMO around and lots of other single-player games, that was inspired by Elder Scrolls system with the factions. So again, World of Warcraft, if this is accurate, if this is true, again having an element to it which is coming from Japanese side of things, where basically this game wouldn't exist. That's how you have to look at this, because none of these games here would exist if Chainmail didn't exist, if Dungeons & Dragons didn't exist. These games over here would not have existed if D&D for the Play-Doh was not made, or if Akalabeth was never made, or Ultima was never made, if Reaper was never made, Warhammer, if Colossal Cave Adventure was never made, this stuff would never be done. Mud One is responsible for all this stuff. That's how you have to look at it. It's very... when you're looking at how this stuff is made, like Mystery Dungeon games, that comes from NetHack, And by extension, Lufia, when they have the Ancient Cave, which is in the second game, and the third game is basically almost, a lot of the dungeon exploration is basically based off of the Ancient Cave portion, where there's always walls that break down, the randomly generated levels and stuff. This stuff wouldn't exist. Azure Dreams, which I have reviewed on this channel, that wouldn't exist if NetHack didn't exist, if Rogue didn't exist, if Zork didn't exist, if Advent didn't exist, if Dungeons & Dragons never existed. These games would not exist. So they're all part of a family. They really are. There's no JRPG and WRPG. It's complete nonsense. There's always games influencing always other games, and there's no borders here. It's simply what games the designers play, and then they took some of those mechanics and put them in their game, and then somebody played that game and took some of the mechanics from that game and put it into their game. That's all it is here. And I'm trying to break down the timeline and the hierarchy, the family tree, if you will, is what I'm trying to figure out. Because there's a family tree here, but it's incomplete. And I need to complete it. That's what I'm doing right now. So, this has been a very unscripted rant, me just sort of running, rambling off the top of my head about what my process is here and how I've been thinking. But I hope that you guys, I don't think I've left anything out. I've talked about everything that I have so far, I believe. So what I want, what I'd like to see is if you think that you have found an interview about some of these important games where someone has said, yeah, I was influenced by this other game, that's why I made this game. If you can find those sources, I would really appreciate if you let me know about it. Send me a personal message, leaving a comment here, and a video response, whatever. If you could find information that I don't have that proves or disproves some of these theories, that would be fantastic. Because as it is right now, I'm going to have to do a lot of interviewing, tracking down designers, just like that, to put together the full video presentation that I want to have. And I think it's important to do because a lot of these designers, they're getting up in age. Some of them have passed away, unfortunately, already. A lot of the core D&D guys are no longer with us, and that's unfortunate. And I see that happening with the next generation of designers as well. The guys who are responsible for this stuff are in their later years now, and they're going to be passing away. We're not going to know, we're not going to know reliably where they got the ideas from, and what games are the parents of other games that descend from, you know. And like I said, it's a family. It really is. And we need to put the family tree together so that future generations of gamers understand where all these game mechanics came from. Because I think it's important for understanding the art of game design, understanding the science to it. You know, if you don't understand where these mechanics came from, it's very difficult to understand how they should be used. It's something that Bartle has talked about before in his the interview I did with him, as well as his book Design of Virtual Worlds. There's a specific reason why certain mechanics are put into games. And if you don't understand why those mechanics are there, it's very difficult to effectively use them in games. It really it leads to poor game design, because the designer assumes that the mechanic should be there, but they don't understand why it's there. So they put it in the game, and they don't use it effectively because they don't understand the mechanic. So understanding the family tree is going to help people understand why the mechanics are there. So it's also important just to give people credibility there might be some obscure game, like who's ever heard of the Black Onyx? You know, most gamers have no idea what it is, but it's responsible for so much, and it doesn't get the credibility that it should have for birthing so many other games. So it's important to properly cite it, and that's what I'm trying to do. And hope you guys will support that and help me out as much as you can, and just share the video around. Maybe we can get, you know, the people who designed some of the games on here to come forward and say, yeah, you know, I played this game and I took these mechanics from that game and I put it into my game. You know, that would be really helpful. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you guys in the next one. Laters.